welcome to the channel. I really need your support. This is a subscription to my boosty, thank you in advance. Before watching, please like and subscribe to the channel. Enjoy watching. Chapter 1, Emergence. How did I end up in the universe of a Japanese mangaka? Who knows? It's just that one day I woke up in an unfamiliar environment for me, with definitely not my memories of the shelter boy Keion Shinichi from this world. I didn't remember my past life. More precisely, I remembered the world itself, books that I really loved to read, films that often had fairly famous actors, even advertising on TV. All this, in the smallest detail. Did I have such a memory? But nothing about myself and my personal life. Quite strange, to be honest. Unless I could conclude that I was about 17 years old. How nervous I was when I woke up in a very cheap hotel on a Japanese futon, and not in the body I was used to. Then I almost went hysterical, but oddly enough, I was saved by a headache along with the flooding memories of the former occupant of my current body. No, I'm not nervous or hysterical. I even considered myself a relatively calm person, but in this case. In general, I quickly lost consciousness then. Fortunately, I passed out simply from overexertion and the huge amount of information that fell on my poor head. Well, and pain in this very head, but for no more than 10 minutes. After which a genin came to me in my small room and escorted me to Konoha. Having woken me up with rather strong wishes for health, this example of a shinobi quickly brought me to the village, where he left me in front of the hostel without even saying goodbye. Fortunately, he at least handed me the required documents. But this is all lyrics. How did I manage then? Doesn't really matter now. Only 2 weeks have passed, and the memories are already shrouded in haze. It seems that a lot of time has already flown by, but that's exactly what it seems, just a lot of events happened in such a short period of time. Then, after settling into my apartment and going through the grindstones of the bureaucratic machine, which had bled me to the point of complete moral exhaustion, I quickly combed through the memory of my recipient and found out my entire story of getting to Konoha. As it turned out, the orphanage was testing the amount of chakra, and I took one of the lowest levels, thanks to which I ended up in the Konoha Shinobi Academy. But rather simply because it was much closer than everyone else. Or what are the acceptance parameters? I don't know this. I was scheduled to enter the academy in 2 whole weeks, during which I had to settle into my apartment, given, from the generosity of the village, receive all the necessary documents for the orphan's benefit and my admission to study, and also just get a little used to the change of environment. Why is there so little time? Well, how should I know? I don't know. Most likely, those in power justifiably did not want to just support orphans who are not even in training. 2 weeks, thank you already for giving it. The first thing I did after receiving all the necessary documents was to improve my life. Namely rearranging the furniture so that it would be more comfortable for me. But this did not stop me from thinking about what awaited me next. Become a victim, good, but I didn't see anything good in what was happening. This world not the one that suited me. I never liked to overcome. However, after common sense, it turned out to be good too, because I didn't have time to break the canon and I'm unlikely to have time until I received the rank of genin, so I shouldn't be nervous. At the moment I found myself here, I was 7, almost 8 years old. What follows from this? That's right, I only have about 5 years left until I graduate from the academy, and during this time I need to prepare at least a little for the realities of the shinobi world. Do you want peace? Prepare for war, is that what they say? But there's something I don't want at all. However, whining is whining, but the war is on schedule, that's my motto. But we should get rid of whining, however. 2 days ago the Uchiha clan was slaughtered. All that was left was Sasuke, who was recovering from what had happened, Itachi, who had successfully become a nuke nin, and also Obito, who had gone a little crazy. Why did the ANBU captain do this? Did Danzo use Kodo Amatsukami on him? Did he really decide to do this for the well-being of the village? Or maybe, Uchiha Madara helped him by putting pressure on Itachi in time to team up with the head of the root? No one knows. But what happened fact. And soon Danzo will have several unaccounted for red eyes in his hand. This is what pushed me to especially intense training and, in particular, to rethink my moral qualities, my humanity, and the framework on which I will rely in the future. I didn't want to bring good to people without their desire. And even more so, I didn't want to turn into a bloodthirsty monster, like Haydn, or into one of the killers with very vague concepts of morality, like the same Tobito or Itachi. However, I also didn't like Danzo's insensitive subordinates, incapable of the slightest humanity. To put it mildly, Chapter 2, Training. Today I was expected to enter the place of training for future shinobi. Rising early in the morning, I quickly cleaned myself up, ate some noodles at Ichiraka to celebrate the occasion, and then headed to the academy building, the route to which I had figured out in advance. Having joined a flock of children who had already split into groups, I stopped in splendid isolation and stood in anticipation of a pathetic speech being delivered to us, which did not take long to arrive. The third Hokage came especially for us, future genin. Sarutobi Hiruzen. By the way, quite an old grandpa. The image from the anime was respected, but here his appearance was somewhat more mature. Perhaps he looked 80 years old, thanks to the fact that here, after all, it was not animation, but a real person, although they were similar. His voice turned out to be quite sonorous, and the lecture this time was quite short apparently. He was in a hurry to get somewhere. Having finished speaking, the Hokage took his leave and with a nod allowed the teachers to take us to the academy building, where we were rather quickly divided into 3 groups. This is probably justified by something, but out of these 3 I ended up in the canon one. I wonder what made me so different. In my group now, all the future heroes of this universe were easily guessed. Strangely, Sakura was not in it, apparently, so that the teams were divided into 3s, they decided not to take her, preferring me in their choice. I wonder if she really has even less chakra than me? It doesn't matter though. I hope she will find a place for herself in another group, and I didn't harm her too much by appearing. It is unlikely that she will already become a student of the 5th, well, certainly not through connections, like the latter's teammate from the Uchiha and Uzumaki. I don't care enough about this girl that I won't be too sorry if she doesn't rise as high as she did in canon. Let him sit and have fun here. Meanwhile, our class teacher entered, easily recognizable by the characteristic scar on his nose. Everyone, welcome to the Ninja Academy. My name is Yumino Irika, and I will be your class teacher and main teacher throughout your entire education. Our group the first one, so look at the schedule about it. Rejoicing that the children were silent and listening, our young teacher continued, studying at the academy usually lasts 5 years, but it also happens that some children finish the main course earlier. Irika paused briefly, only to launch into further explanations a few moments later. This year we are just preparing to take the path of shinobi and will study the countries around us, as well as the country of fire and its cities. We will also begin the first courses in subjects such as penmanship, mathematics, geometry, and shinobi history. And finally, at the end of the year we will begin to study chakra theory. This is what makes a person become a shinobi. We will also start training the body, otherwise you will not turn out to be a ninja. Yumino shook his head. In the second year of study, in addition to the previous subjects, we will learn bukijutsu, the art of throwing various weapons. Otherwise, we will consolidate what we have already covered in old subjects, as well as study new topics that will be very important in the art of shinobi. Gradually, attention in the class began to decline. The clanless children of the townspeople were not ready for such a long lecture. They lacked perseverance. Stop the noise! Irika suddenly barked. The children fell silent in fear. If you don't listen yourself, then this is not a reason to stop others from listening. Now let's continue. In the third year of study we will already be quite developed physically, so in addition to physical training lessons you will begin to practice taijutsu, the art of hand-to-hand combat. There will be sparring between students. In addition, the practical use of the chakra theory that you have learned over the previous 2 years will soon begin. The teacher knocked on the table, sensing that the children were distracted again. But what can we take from them? 7 years. In the 4th year of study, the workload will be significantly increased. In addition to the previous subjects, we will begin to learn ninjutsu, the basic art of shinobi, namely, techniques based on the use of chakra. We will also study a short course on protection against genjutsu, the subtle art of illusions that can deceive our senses. Additionally, everyone can learn the technique of sealing and unsealing special scrolls for various shinobi equipment. This is the basics of the art of working with seals. It is also called fuinjutsu. Irika took a deep breath. The lecture was coming to its logical conclusion. His throat was dry. In the last, 5th year of study, survival courses will await us. We will learn to live in the wild conditions that often accompany the craft of shinobi, and also this year you will have exams on everything that you have learned during the Ninja Academy course. And now a few organizational points. The schedule will be posted here in this class. Remember the audience. First lesson is tomorrow, so grab all your penmanship supplies. Thank you for your attention. Have a nice day, everyone. See you tomorrow. Irika waved to the children, who, without even listening to him to the end, ran out of the audience. Nothing unusual, however. Only the clan members and a few conscientious children remained. By the way, Naruto was not included in this list. Sensei, I raised my hand. I know that there is a library at the academy. I wanted to ask how to get there, and do you need a pass to get there? Already seeking knowledge? Rubbed the back of Yumano's head. Well, it is commendable. The library is located in the next wing of the building. I'll take you there. I nodded. It looks like we got a very good teacher. Meanwhile, the bell rang, and the remaining children, having asked a couple of meaningless questions each, bowed out in the same way. The only sensible question was asked, oddly enough, by Hinata Hyuga. I recognized her by her characteristic hairstyle and eyes. Well, and also from the way she asked the question, sorry, she drew Irika's attention to herself. He smiled kindly, but slightly tiredly. Will we have many other teachers? It thought. You won't be the only one teaching. The girl was embarrassed and hesitated. However, she was able to express her thoughts. Oh, I completely forgot. Yumano scratched the back of his head once again and smiled good-naturedly. But that's okay, I'll tell the other children another time. I, as I already said, am your main teacher. I will be giving you chakra theory, history, as well as geography, geometry and algebra. For any practical outdoor activities you will have a separate teacher. Otherwise I will always be with you, except for a couple of disciplines that I simply cannot teach myself. Irika glanced pointedly at his watch, as if to say that the audience should already be over. Well, guys, do you have any more questions? Sorry, I'm a little tired today, but don't worry, if you don't have time to find out something today, then tomorrow or any other day everything will become clear one way or another. We agreed in unison that we would ask questions another time, and then we took our leave, allowing our teacher to finally catch his breath. He probably lost his voice today, poor thing. I had never been a teacher, of course, but I was well aware of the daunting task of keeping track of a whole bunch of 7-year-olds. Hard days await him. In principle, as I already said, I liked the teacher. Friendly, but strict with bullies, and also similar to an ordinary person. As truly ordinary as a shinobi could be. Of course, this could all be a mask, but I really don't think so. I think he really enjoys his job and behaves naturally. Even if he reports personally to the Hokage, this is not a reason to be somehow biased towards him. I enjoyed my first real day at the academy. After a short introductory part, where the bulk of the students asked questions, Irika gave a very interesting history lesson, according to which we began to go through the legends of Rikudo and other undocumented personalities. Apparently, the plan for this subject involved going through it from the very beginning of more or less known events. Yumano told the story interestingly, with a sparkle, so to speak, so there was no need to complain. Unfortunately, many of the children did not appreciate this and soon began to openly nod off. However, a couple of loud blows on the table and well-thrown crayons on the foreheads of the most dull ones quickly corrected the situation. Even Nara did not escape the teacher's righteous anger. I was in no hurry to get to know the class. Firstly, I simply had nothing to talk to them about, and secondly, most of them were either from some clan or under the tutelage of the top of the village, Naruto. Of course, the children here are mentally a little older on average, a year or two of real age, but this does not mean at all that I am interested in them. The girls here, apart from an increased desire to squeeze them in, were nothing like that. Only Ino has already tried to pretend to be someone older than she actually is, but even she herself most likely did not understand why she was doing this. Even despite my relative youth, it is quite easy for me to understand the ins and outs of the behavior of almost any child in the class. Still, none of the children yet knew how to wear any kind of behavioral mask properly, so they all walked, as they say, with their hearts wide open, and were completely unable to lie or keep back. And how they were scorched by their emotions and facial expressions. Any person is just a little bit of an empath, without any training. And children who gush with emotions and their sincerity will not leave anyone indifferent. So am I. I was very pleased to watch them, but at the same time I understood that communicating with them a little out of my level. That's why I kept myself a little aloof in class, and the children subconsciously felt that something was wrong with me. After examining my classmates for several days, I came to a basic conclusion that confirmed the existence of an almost guaranteed canon, albeit somewhat more realistic. If in the anime certain character traits were very much exaggerated, then here, as in real life, each person was more stable, so to speak, about character. True, traits already known to me sometimes manifested themselves periodically. For example, Kiba Inuzuka was actually a bit of an alpha. He always tried to look better than he really was, boasted and behaved as arrogantly and impudently as possible, even for a 7-year-old child. Hinata Hyuga was indeed very cute in appearance, although she did not quite resemble her image from the anime. Her eyes were a little smaller, and it suited her much more. Her character, as I already said, was not completely downtrodden. She could talk normally with her peers, just because of her quiet voice and the way she looked at her fingers. It seemed to everyone that the girl was constantly embarrassed by something. In the same way, Nara was indeed very lazy and showed it off, but at the same time he was not alien to children's games. Choji really loved to eat, but he did not at all elevate food to an absolute. He was also a very good-natured and quite easy to communicate person. I sometimes talked to him about various little things. The only ones who in reality exactly repeated their canon image were, oddly enough, both main characters, Naruto and Sasuke. If Uzumaki has not yet shouted that he will become Hokage, but clearly will soon begin to do so, then Uchiha has already completely withdrawn into himself, not even trying to establish contact with his classmates. Sasuke didn't prepare any homework, at least not the written ones. If verbally he could still somehow answer, pushing the words through his silent coolness. Then in writing he did not bring a single homework. Iruka was not too pleased, but did not swear. Apparently, he attributed the lack of completed work to stress after the massacre in the Uchiha quarter. In a sense, he was indeed right, but in fact he made it worse. Sasuke realized that he was getting away with it and continued to work carelessly, ignoring Yumino's sad face. Still, the teacher from Iruka was not the best, and this did not depend on Iruka the man. Experience played a role here, but our teacher did not have it. Naruto couldn't prepare for anything at all. His perseverance, if not equal to 0, was somewhere very close to this bar. Any information did not stay in his head for long, apparently, considering that it had nothing to do there. And his written assignments were most often not completed at all, according to the principal. But this is boring, Databeo, which he proclaimed more than once. Well, or they were done so crookedly that it was almost impossible even for the teacher to read even a couple of characters of his scribble. The clanless children were practically unknown to me. Their faceless mass stood apart from the rest. And she didn't bother me either, preferring to be in her own, very narrow circle of friends. This suited everyone. And me too. The first 2 weeks after I started, I just finally got used to the new environment. Until now, everything around me was unusual for the most part. Still, the knowledge was not mine. All the signs, local mentality, etiquette features that were difficult for me to perceive. All this was very, very unusual for me. However, I soon got used to it. Man, he is like that. Can adapt to anything. Waking up once again, I quickly got up and did some exercises. Yeah, and now I'm already doing it. Not really. Still, no matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't overcome myself in the morning. I had to put off charging almost every day. It was a shame, but I didn't have enough willpower even for that. After all, I'm not canon Naruto or some Jiraiya. And yet it's nice to wake up when you want it. It's good that today is a day off. Crawling out of bed, I turned on the kettle pre-filled with water and went to the bathroom. After some morning toiletry, I finally drank black tea, which, fortunately, was available here. True, sugar is expensive, the price for it was stinging. But what can't you do for your loved one? In any case, my scholarship was quite large, and, even despite my increased appetite, I had enough money for small pleasures. After eating the classic scrambled eggs, I quickly put on a t-shirt and went outside. Today I had to try to find a part-time job. The first thing I did was go to the forge. Naturally, not a clan one, but still very good. I noticed the master in her a long time ago. He had no assistant, and he was already a man of about 50, although still wiry and strong. I quickly found the door I had already noticed during my previous walk through the shopping arcades and, without giving myself time to hesitate, entered the workshop. Greeted only by the ringing of bells, I found myself in the hallway. Nobody greeted me. Carefully passing through the only door, I found myself in a wide room, which immediately gave away the appearance of a forge. The room had everything for work, several hammers of different sizes for straightening the material, blacksmith's tongs, as well as vats of water, into which, as far as I remember, finished crafts are dipped so that they cool faster. The most important detail of the interior was the blacksmith himself. He looked exactly as I remembered him when he went out to get some air before entering his workshop. Short haircut, strong-willed and weather-beaten face, tenacious gaze, small beard. The master greeted me silently. Either he didn't notice, or I was simply not worth his attention. When I also silently came a little closer, admiring his work, he finally called out to me. "What do you want, kid?" he began rudely. "Well, I won't be scared off that easily. Hello, Blacksmith-sama. The memory of my predecessor suggested that you can contact someone whose name you don't know by profession. I came to ask you for an assistant." The master laughed hoarsely. "Don't call me that. I'm not old enough to be treated like this yet." He waved the hammer, straightening the crooked corner of the next shuriken. "And why do you think that I should take you?" I shrugged. "Why not? At first, it wouldn't hurt for you to at least have an errand boy, and for me to take at least one look at your work, remember something, and then maybe I can help you with something." A laugh was my answer once again. The blacksmith took the pliers, the purpose of which I had so accurately guessed, and lowered the finished product into one of the vats of darkened water. Amid the hiss of the killing weapon cooling down, the master finally answered, He frowned. "As you say? Why not? Come on, come here. Show yourself to the old man." I came out of the light shadow cast by the light bulb on the ceiling and appeared before the blacksmith in all my glory. A thin, puny body, arms like rice sticks, a little thicker. It's a joyless sight. I'm not capable of anything yet. I heard the master say that he returned to work. I've seen better material. But you'll still grow, right? Run away. I nodded at his instructions and immediately rushed to the exit, asking passers-by where the nearest stall was where you could buy a local fast food lunch. Chapter 3: Meditations. A whole month has already passed since I found myself in this world. There was plenty to do, there wasn't much time for rest, but I didn't despair, knowing that I had everything ahead of me. I really liked Shinobi Academy. Of course, the knowledge that was given there was extremely insufficient. Historical stories were extremely superficial, penmanship was studied very leisurely, despite the complexity of the language, and geography was so far limited only to general concepts like north, west, east and south, as well as the location of other great countries relative to ours. In 3 or 4 lessons we only learned the capitals, which we didn't need at all yet. The physical training lessons were more interesting. In addition to serious physical activity, active games were often involved, the names of which for some reason never stuck in my head. The simplest were the tags, and even with them it was easy to get exhausted. My physical condition still left much to be desired. With my classmates, I developed a stable neutrality, which implied communication, mutual assistance, but nothing more. I communicated with everyone and did not deprive anyone of attention. For me, everyone was the same as children, although each with his own quirks. Unfortunately, sometimes condescension addressed to my classmates slipped into my gaze, which irritated many, most often ordinary, clanless children. They were uncomfortable with being looked down upon by someone on the same level as them. And this led to one very unpleasant incident for me. Their resentment gradually accumulated, and then one fine day it spilled out. How do children usually resolve various types of grievances? That's right, such things in childhood are largely resolved with fists that pass over the offender's face. Well, in my case, unfortunately, not only in the face. Evening. Training ground at the academy. There were 5 of them. And I'm alone. No matter how sad it may sound now, the arithmetic turned out to be incredibly simple. At the most interesting point of my beating is one of the academy teachers, who that day, for some reason, was late at work and came to the noise, thereby scaring away the young hooligans. They rushed away, their heels sparkling. However, I never handed them over to the teacher with all the giblets. I'm not used to lying. To justify myself, I want to say that these guys didn't think it was enough either. After this incident, they didn't bother me anymore. Well, I was only happy about this, and beyond words. In addition to the academy, I also had other concerns. After classes, every day I was with the blacksmith for about 2 or 3 hours, helping the master in whatever way I could. Unfortunately, my weight and inability to work with chakra did not allow me to help him with force, but my nimble legs and curiosity provided at least moral support to the blacksmith. He also once told me in a very original way why he didn't have an assistant before. "You know, kid," the man once began the conversation, looking from the newly polished katana to me, "each master has his own recipes on metal processing and the technique of creating a perfect sword discovered by himself or inherited from his ancestors, which a craftsman who respects himself and his family would never share with his rival, even for the sake of the patronage of some powerful person. These secrets of craftsmanship concerned everything: the raw materials used, methods of smelting and forging, water temperature at different stages, and other tricks." I listened to him attentively, at the same time putting a new product on the display window, trying to figure out what he was driving at. And one of the old legends said that one day a blacksmith saw that a colleague, who had come to visit him, secretly dipped his hand into the water, which was intended for hardening steel. Only I wanted to turn to face the master, as the tip of the katana sheath lightly touched the skin of the neck. To be honest, I didn't expect this. Instantly, without saying a word, he grabbed the sword and cut off the unfortunate man's hand. And then, looking into my surprised eyes, he laughed so hard that I didn't have the strength to keep the smile on my face, despite the delicate situation. The man immediately removed the empty sheath from my neck, into which the katana was immediately, with an elegant movement, placed. Then he handed me the sword. "You're not the shy type, boy," he told me, continuing to laugh. I was in bewilderment, looking first at the outstretched sword, then at the man himself. "Is this such a simple check?" I asked, taking the product from rough hands, admiring the presented katana. It looked more like a work of art than a murder weapon. At that moment it seemed to me that not a single drop of blood had the right to end up on this blade. It was so perfect. "You've already passed it a long time ago, kid." He didn't hesitate to pat me on the head in addition to everything. His eyes shone with mischievous sparks. "Consider that this was an original way of telling you about it. I don't feel bad intentions in you, unlike other guys I had to deal with before you, and I like you. We can say that the probationary period has been passed, my young friend." As soon as he finished speaking, I immediately began expressing my gratitude. The blacksmith placed the greatest trust in me, and I could not let him down. Still, he's a great guy. After this event, the old master began to slowly share with me useful skills that could be useful in his difficult craft. Of course, I still didn't have enough strength for practical training, but the theory was also very useful, and I mastered it, throwing aside my laziness. After work, I didn't have much time left, and since I got up at the academy very early, in order to get enough sleep, I needed to go to bed early. I still knew the benefits of getting enough sleep. So I spent the remaining 2 or 3 hours in the library, comprehending various sciences more deeply. The first thing I did was look for such a concept as chakra theory. As much as I wanted to start casting magic as quickly as possible, I didn't want to harm myself in any way. After all, what does our Russian person do? At first he breaks something during assembly, and then he's like, "That's strange, why did it go bad? I did everything right. I'll go and look at the instructions." At first, this is exactly what I wanted to do according to my mentality, but then I finally listened to the weakening voice of reason and decided to look first for the notorious instructions. After I had to process all the information I found in the library, I quietly howled and stared reproachfully at somewhere in the sky. As it turns out, the local authors are very, very fond of water and philosophical reflections. They talk so allegorically about their exploits that you want to find Edo Tensei, refine this technique so that those summoned feel pain, and then send them to the dungeons of Marino Ibiki. And perhaps take part in their interrogation yourself on the topic. Why mock future generations of students like this? In general, I had to work hard. It took me almost 2 whole months to summarize the information received from all the scrolls without being distracted by anything else. However, to tell the truth, part of this time was needed to remember the Russian language in written form and get better at it. Have you ever tried to write with your left hand? Motor skills were at a very low level. I decided to keep notes in my native language since there is no more effective way to encrypt my observations in this world, since, I hope, I am the only alien at the moment who arrived from planet Earth who knows Russian. And it's even better that there are no invaders at all besides me. But in spite of everything, the job was done. Having summarized all the information received and extracted from it grains of more or less plausible knowledge, I finally decided to do my future magic. The next day started as usual. The only thing that irritated me was the phenomenon of stretch time. As soon as I sat down at my desk, in anticipation of the awakening of my hearth, time began to drag unbearably slowly, terribly annoying. Why, I even tried to take a nap, and you know what? According to my calculations, I spent at least an hour in a dream, at which time another lecture was going on. But in reality, no more than 10 minutes passed. All I could do was howl quietly, so that no one would hear, at the ceiling, and then, clenching my teeth tightly, wait for the end of all the lessons. Finally, having difficulty waiting for the end of classes, I went to refresh myself before a significant moment in my life. After eating a portion of sweet dango, I ran into my apartment just in case, taking with me the theory scrolls and a portion of rice with meat, which was the main dish here. After spending some time searching, I found a rather pleasant clearing. Officially, it was not a testing ground, since there was nothing man-made here. And there was no damaged iron, which meant that no one conducted their training here. Which was very pleasing, especially because the place was really very good, and it was located relatively close to the hostel where I was currently living. Having settled comfortably under a large tree, however, they are all big here, I once again quickly went over the theory to remember all the most interesting and tricky points. If we take into account most of the information, then everyone learns to feel chakra in their own way. First of all, meditation took place. Oddly enough, there is no specific technique, however, everyone can do it. It just all depends on age. Usually this happens around the age of 10 for every chakra user, if he is not from some clan. For those, this happens much faster, around 6 or 7 years. I'm clanless. Unfortunately, my body did not receive training from childhood, but on the other hand, I should have my advantages. In any case, in the absence of a technique, I would still find out what exactly cannot be done with the chakra channels, and what can be done, but with caution. Therefore, I have approximate training plans prepared in advance. So, I sat down to meditate. As I have learned from many sources, the ability to meditate is not given to everyone. And an example of this is Naruto, who, due to his character, will never be able to meditate properly in his life. Of course, he has attacks of seriousness, but they are very, very rare. Maybe he really was able to meditate for a while on Mount Myaboku to feel the Sun chakra, but he did this no less than 16 years old. What can we say about the 7-year-old Uzumaki? After all, at this age he is even more energetic and absolutely incapable of the slightest concentration. Meditation is an extremely difficult way to understand yourself more deeply. Feel yourself from the inside, feel every muscle, every fiber of your nerves, and even try to understand your inner world. In general, this technique offers great prospects for development, but not every shinobi will be able to embrace them. This activity requires incredible concentration, the ability to sit in one place for a long time, proper imagination, and also just the right type of character. And mine, I hope, is just right for this. In fact, what is meant here is not some concept that denotes a set of emotional reactions to an unusual situation for an individual, but a somewhat deeper meaning. As far as I understand, the more broadly a shinobi can think, the greater prospects he can open with the help of such a useful tool of self-knowledge, like meditation. So now I am trying, with the help of meditation, to better understand myself, my current body, and even the unknown energy that makes me not a simple man in the street, but a warrior, an assassin in the future. The first few minutes it was very difficult for me to find at least approximately the desired state. The blades of grass tickled my skin pleasantly, the bark of the tree I was leaning on seemed harder and rougher than before, and the occasional gusts of wind only disrupted my concentration, which included trying to detach myself from it all. I don't know how long I sat at this activity. After a certain period of time, I simply lost track of it and allowed some new, hitherto unexperienced feeling to carry me away. I didn't know anything about meditation, but before that I couldn't even imagine that it would be so great. A crystal clear mind, unencumbered by thoughts, an absolutely calm and detached state. All this simply fascinated me with the unusualness of the feelings experienced. I didn't even notice how several hours had passed, I was so detached from the world. It was impossible to express it in words, but take my word for it, this is one of the most interesting and even somewhat pleasant states. That day I did not feel chakra, but I was absolutely convinced of the benefits of meditation and the prospects for its development. After all, if this was only the first step, then what can be achieved in the future? Even my very well-developed imagination gave in to the prospects. It was truly fascinating, and not only because of its benefits. Since then I have become almost obsessed with meditation. I enjoyed spending time on self-discovery so much that I very soon learned to measure the time I spent on it. And once I acquired the much-needed skill, I began to spend literally all the free time that I had left after doing other things. Thus, it was not surprising that at the next lesson I was somehow very casually able to identify something foreign in myself, something that I had not felt in myself before. With difficulty catching on to the desired sensation, I was able to awaken the chakra quite quickly. Still, I mastered the necessary techniques, which are the next step after meditation, first of all. Almost every scroll I read literally quoted its counterparts. They all said that each shinobi felt chakra in their own way, and no one could accurately describe their feelings. There were some associations, of course, but in essence they were in no way able to reflect the true feeling of this power in oneself. Yes, for me chakra was associated with strength. No, not like this. With power. And no, far from the one that was so minimalistically shown in one far, far away galaxy. No, this force gave a real feeling of its power. I really felt what I would be capable of in the future. But again, this is only the first step in mastering chakra. I feel like I still have a lot of interesting things to do. Chapter 4, Direction. Since I discovered the world of meditation, everything around me has changed. Even though I hadn't gotten any real benefit from them since I opened the hearth, I still didn't want to give them up. It's strange, But if someone had told me before that I would enjoy meditating, I wouldn't have believed it. I don't know if I could do this on planet Earth, but chakra, as far as I understand, makes it much easier to work with oneself. For example, with the help of chakra you can perfectly feel your own internal organs, which you have never even seen. In general, apparently, the world of meditation with chakra is connected quite closely, and it is because of this that I decided not to abandon such a promising direction, which is even used for collecting sanchakra, according to the animated series. Meanwhile, I had less and less time. Since then, when we improved our penmanship, we added the history and geography lessons that were promised to us, which we had to take notes little by little. The chakra theory still remained a theory, no matter how idiotic it may sound, while the number of hours in history, geography, and physical training was constantly increasing. Despite this, I was not against it. Now the teachers were actively building a base from which one could advance to the next levels of difficulty of the lessons. If you tried to throw an almost half-kilogram kunai made of cheap metal, somewhat similar to cast iron, you would understand what I'm talking about. So until we are physically strong enough, we will not work with anything more complex than general physical training. Everything was the same in the forge, even though I was growing by leaps and bounds compared to my peers, whom I have already surpassed by 5 to 6 centimeters. However, physical fitness was still enough only to submit another piece of iron for processing. But the blacksmith liked me, and I liked him too, that was absolutely clear. The master constantly told me something about his craft, and even showed me examples. Theory could not overcome the need for practice, and we both understood this, patiently waiting for the moment when I grew up a little or learned to work with chakra. I found the craft of a blacksmith very attractive, but definitely not as a main profession, because any civilians in this world have a huge chance of not waking up the next morning, since a competitor decided to hire some strong shinobi. The only case here where your life will depend on you to the maximum is the one in which you ninja. But these were all little things. Now I needed to decide on my ninja path. I had to understand what I would do in the future. Do I need some guidelines? As you know, in the shinobi world there are several areas to which a ninja can devote himself. But in essence they can be divided into 4 main types, if taken generally. So let's start with the first one. And this is hand-to-hand combat. In general, this direction will be secondary for me. Oddly enough, I understand that I won't be able to surpass the locals in this, being an orphan. If clan ninjas have been training close combat skills since childhood, and some have their own, completely different from the generally accepted ones, then the children of townspeople should not be taken into account at all. Since there is no one to train them, and for some reason they themselves are in no hurry to develop, probably because the life of an ordinary person is closer to them, I shouldn't look up to them. I think in this direction I just need to strain my veins for physical training, because the most important thing for me is this means keeping up with the speed and force of the blow, and I won't bother with the stances. Because a fair head-on fight is simply contraindicated for me, since I feel like it's not my thing. Of course, I spent a lot of time in sports clubs at one time, but this does not at all give me skills in real combat. After all, it's a sport and a real battle, completely different things, especially since I never had real opponents. You won't believe it, but really, never, either drunk, I never liked alcohol and almost never tried it, nor on the street, since I preferred to solve my problems with words. And in general he was a very non-conflict person. So I don't have the skill to communicate using the language of power. Next direction, chakra. In the absence of experience in this direction, it can only be assessed through my knowledge from anime, as well as from other works, which, in theory, can give me interesting ideas regarding chakra. In general, this is a very interesting and even main direction for me. If the use of ninjutsu is extremely attractive to me, if only because it is most similar to the magic from fairy tales that I am familiar with, then genjutsu will fit perfectly with my leisurely character and with possible tactics that will include a variety of deceptive maneuvers, because getting into close combat is actually contraindicated for me. The ability to heal using magic is very tempting, but no. So, Imagine the amount of information that includes a collection of ordinary school textbooks from the 1st to the 11th grades on biology from Earth. Now imagine the amount of information that would be required for a real practitioner level in this area. The automated ability to identify and know all the nerve endings and nodes, the location of tissues, pink and non-pink muscles, etc., etc., etc. It is impossible to master all this in an instant. And finally, add a whole section dedicated to the interaction of all this with the chakra. Introduced? Great. Now try to think, how long will it take to strain your brain to learn all this? That is why clans contain only a minimum of rinnegan, since even duty to the clan is not able to force people to learn such enormous information for the dubious joy of being the number one target in any more or less serious battle. In general, the maximum that I will take for myself from this area is first aid for wounds, and also, if necessary, I will learn a couple of basic poisons and antidotes to them. And if you're lucky, a technique for transferring chakra. Because, as far as I understand, it is no more difficult to die from chakra exhaustion than from wounds. Finally, the last direction Fuin Jutsu. All more or less serious shinobi master this art at least to a minimum, if not more, all 3 sanins, all the Kage of Konoha, Kakashi and even Obito, and therefore his teacher, Uchiha Madara. I don't know the real complexity of this art, and even its principles. But even to my untrained eye it is clear that it actually has very serious prospects. A huge number of different sealing techniques, barriers. In addition, if there are seals of silence, then there must be seals to protect the mind. In general, I would like to believe that this direction is not much more complicated than the programming that I managed to devote several years to on Earth. And if given the opportunity, I will definitely try to study this art at least at an elementary level. Thus, if I had a real choice, I would prefer genjutsu, ninjutsu, a physically developed body and, if possible, fuin. I also needed to learn first aid skills, but sorry, it's unlikely to take much time. There's nothing particularly difficult about the ability to bandage, anesthetize and fix a wound. However, reality likes to make its own adjustments, so I shouldn't rush to conclusions just yet. Because first I should learn a little bit of everything and then figure out what my chakra is best suited for. Still, I can guess anything, but my real capabilities should be taken into account first of all. Meanwhile, the first year at the academy ended, and for me it all went a little too routinely. As usual, I woke up, had breakfast, and came to study, where we wrote the final test, and then listened to Iraka-sensei, who gladly said goodbye to us and kicked us out for the holidays. True, I managed to catch him and asked him a question about the library. I now have some free time. I needed to spend more time on it while I could still spend a lot of time reading. Apparently, my reputation with the teacher turned out to be quite high, because he said that it seemed like I wasn't supposed to, but he could talk to the librarian, who would let me into the abode of knowledge during the holidays. I sincerely and very warmly thanked Yumino and, wishing him a good rest, went to the library. I was primarily interested in techniques for increasing chakra control. Still, just feeling the source is not enough, you also need to be able to use it properly, and it would also be nice for me to learn how to measure its volume. Still, I need to know what to start from. Unfortunately, the library at the academy somewhat disappointed me. If there was still a little water about the theory of chakra in general, then nothing was said at all about the size of the reserve. Of course, it was written that some shinobi are supposedly stronger than others and some have more chakra, but not more. And it was very depressing. Having received a turnaround in this regard, I began to look for methods of training chakra control. And do you know what I found? Right. The only technique described was the leaf method, which helped to concentrate on one place of the body. Of course, I adopted it, especially since I remembered that this method somehow helped Naruto in creating his favorite technique. But, in fact, I had to get a lip rolling machine, because there are no other methods for chakra control either was. Apparently, I will have to do everything even without anyone's help, starting with the fact that I will have to train chakra control without adult supervision, and ending with developing my own controlled training methods when walking on vertical surfaces and water ceases to have an effect. Taking offense at the library, I took away all the descriptions of D and E rank techniques I found. I rewrote them, and then beautifully and pathetically closed the door behind me. I will no longer set foot in a place where all the more or less valuable information is missing, especially since I have already learned the basics. So, I had practically the whole summer in front of me, which I could use at my discretion. We must take everything from it. What's our plan there? That's right, it's time for the power of youth. But seriously, now I need to improve my physical fitness. If you believe the remnants of my very leaky memory regarding canon events, then good physical training indirectly affects the source of chakra in a good way. And since I am a clanless orphan, then, apparently, I do not have very much chakra by definition. Yes, there were people like Minato, but this only proves that it is quite possible to pump up the reserve. Means what? So it's time to do it. Arriving at the clearing I had already chosen, I enjoyed doing a light warm-up. My current physical condition was not very serious, but I gained some skills during the first year of the academy. Though we only did general physical training for various muscle groups, and I agreed with the teachers in everything, perhaps, except that we didn't teach stretching, whereas children at that age are very flexible. Before I found myself in the shinobi world, I managed to test this from my own experience, managing to do the splits at the age of 9. He grew up and quickly lost his shape, and only then realized what a log he had become. I couldn't get the stretch back, because the bones became many times stronger, as did the tendons and joints. And in the end, I had to give up on flexibility, although some of the stretched muscles remained in certain places. Now I had to carry out the first stretching warm-up complex in this world, which I brought from very far away. Everything is as usual, bending the fingers towards the toes, exactly the same bending while sitting, and then trying to reach each leg in turn, while the free one was bent back. After that, rubbing my stretched legs, which ached from unaccustomed use, I sat down first on the transverse and then on the longitudinal splits. Well, that is, as I sat down, rather I tried. Despite the flexibility of my body as a child, my coordination of movements and sense of balance suffered greatly, so I often fell to the side even before the rhythmic stretching of the muscles began. After the lesson, I felt a rather forgotten, but nostalgic pain in my muscles. Having indulged in masochism with pleasure, I go home just to fall into bed. After training, I usually never felt like eating, but an hour after training I was literally hungry. Luckily I knew this and the food was prepared in advance. Chapter 5, Chakra. For starters, I grew up over the summer. I don't understand why over the summer, but when I woke up one morning, I noticed that I was looking at the world from a greater height than usual. No, this does not mean that I grew up in one day, I just wasn't able to notice it right away. I had already forgotten all the delights of a constantly changing center of gravity and height. I guess I missed them. Next, I finally arranged for myself stable training. I don't know about the power of youth, but every day I did at least 3 to 4 hours of physical training and stretching. As a rule, I did it for an hour at a time, and organized several approaches. Of course, it was quite difficult for me to kick my laziness. Kicking a part of myself is not very easy, yes, but I did it. No, this did not mean that I stopped being lazy. How lazy I was. And whined. But I did. The fact with faster stretching was proven. Daily exercises very quickly put me in all the splits that were possible. Again, I didn't even immediately notice how after the next warm-up I had nowhere to stretch. Just once and that's it, and I'm already sitting without problems, nowhere lower. My coordination of movements has improved significantly over these 3 months, due to the fact that I began to look more like a person than a larva. I felt much more comfortable and familiar. Training also helped. I had to train both the balance of the body and its general dexterity, as well as the reaction to brain commands, which were far from being carried out religiously before. I haven't been in a hurry to work with chakra yet. The most I've dared to do is try to slightly speed up or slow down the movement of the chakra along the SCC. Alas, nothing worked out for me, but I was even glad about it, because I was subconsciously afraid of messing up even in such a simple matter. After all, there could only be one mistake, and I could remain disabled for the rest of my life. It was as if the chakra itself did not want to obey me. I felt it, but it was necessary to influence it much more strongly for the result, which I was afraid to do. I gradually began to take meditation to a new level. If before I simply meditated without doing anything, now I tried, without leaving a trance, to study the entire chakra system. I also learned the ability to concentrate attention on something. Observing one flow of chakra for many hours, I tell you, is not the easiest task. I think the ability to stick to something for a long time will be useful to me, even if I don't know how yet. I also increased the speed of entering trance each time. Now I needed not a specially measured 30 minutes, but only 3 months, and what a result! I wanted to believe that one day I would be able to meditate on the go. This could help me a lot in certain situations. And if I can also master some new direction, different from my look, inside myself, then it will be much easier for me to do it. After all, meditation has one system. Which means, what? That's right, if I learn one type, the other will be easier for me to do. However, everything is as always. Good chakra control? You'll learn the technique faster. Well developed physically? Great, it will be much easier for you to learn new stances, strikes, and work with swords and shurikens. The last and pleasant event for me over the summer was that the blacksmith paid me for 3 months of work. For him, as a master, that amount was not so great, while I was able to fill the refrigerator with normal products, as well as buy myself normal clothes. If earlier I walked around in the 3 pairs of shorts and t-shirts left over from the shelter, now I was able to afford 3 more pairs of t-shirts, good pants that do not restrict movement, and also a cap that will protect my head from the sun. I wanted these things to last me as long as possible, reminding me of my very first salary. Therefore, I took all the things to grow, and at first I didn't even wear them, protecting them from excessive intensive wear. The blacksmith turned out to be an interesting conversationalist, intelligent, and very cynical. He often talked about the real state of affairs in countries, talked about the peculiarities of taxation of village residents, about the authorities among the civilian population, about the daimyo of fire and his courtiers. My first, and I hope not the last, teacher, in his 50 years, managed to visit not only the capital of the country Fire, but also in ordinary villages, earning a living. That was until he earned enough money to move to the hidden village. The man also talked about his competitors and how he fought for his place in the sun. Yes, boy, you asked a question. Do you think it was all that simple? He usually answered any of my questions. And then he started telling stories. In general, more could have been said about him, especially considering how much we communicated with him. I have already mentioned his appearance, but we can add more. It was a man of about 50, maybe a little younger. He usually looked gloomy. His work was not conducive to communication. But nevertheless, he was not a stranger to conversations. Sometimes, like all people, he still needed a conversation. And in general, he willingly shared his knowledge, knowing that it would not go further than my consciousness. And not all the information related to his craft. As I already said, this man has never been anywhere in his life. He spoke about some topics willingly. He didn't even need to be promoted on them, but he didn't want to talk about some topics. The words had to be pulled out almost with pliers, and even with a blacksmith's. The master's bald spot has not yet affected him. Although his hair was quite short and gray, it showed no signs of baldness at all. Although I may not know something about it. The master always dressed simply, without unnecessary ceremony, comfortable and good. Usually he wore nothing more than a blacksmith's apron to protect his clothes from the high temperature. The blacksmith had enough of a tan. I don't know anything about sun exposure, but the redness of his skin definitely showed him as someone who often stands near an open fire. Particularly noticeable were the reddened and rough hands, the skin of which, however, was not at all distinguished by tenderness. Shinobi often came to him, and, as a rule, clanless chunin, since our workshop was designed specifically for this category of ninja. For the genin, the prices were too high, because the orphans could not afford good weapons, while the jonins managed to acquire good weapons during their service. Of course, there were rare exceptions, since a jonin could afford to purchase weapons from clan forges, where they added the simplest fuin to their products and used chakra in their work. When clients appeared, I ran errands bringing the weapon to the master that he asked for. In general, I behaved politely, said hello, and carefully carried out the blacksmith's tasks. He appreciated me very much for this too. This was not said out loud, but apparently, the man became attached to me. Me too, though. I liked him not only as a teacher, but also as a person with remarkable willpower. Be that as it may, blacksmiths are rarely without it. Generally speaking, working with steel required a strong will, since otherwise it would not have been possible to cope with it. This left a certain imprint on those who dealt with it. This is how my first summer in the Naruto world passed, quite unnoticed. I was happy and excited about the future, as much as possible. The beginning of the second year of study was also very routine. We had already written the entrance tests, and 5 clanless children were eliminated. How could they fail that? Who, in fact, did not come to the lineup. The Hokage did not come this time, and the opening speech was made by the director of the academy, a very stern-looking grandfather, if that could be said about a 40-year-old bald man. Why grandfather? In fact, a man at 40 is a man in the prime of his life. The only problem was that in the world of shinobi, few people live to that age. People like our director are considered the longest living people here. And Sarutobi Hiruzen is a walking mummy with sand falling from him. The director made his speech briefly, in a military manner and without sparkle. However, the children don't need more, they just need to quickly sit down and start chatting among themselves in order to discuss their holidays with each other. I'm glad that you're all here today. He began his speech in his muffled voice. I hope you all grow up worthy of the shinobi of your village. I wish you all success. And then finished, however, briefly and laconically, nothing superfluous. Be that as it may, not the entire first day was absorbed in routine. As it turned out, Naruto came in his now favorite bright orange suit. The class, by the way, was slightly shocked. I partially agreed with them. No matter what tank Uzumaki may be in the future, this does not give him any moral right to wear this outfit now. Not only was he annoying in himself, but now the boy will also annoy everyone with his clothes. Apparently, Naruto believes that they will stop hating him if he gives a real reason for such an attitude. But again, this is not really my problem. Yes, and I can't do anything. Meanwhile, I sat down at my desk in splendid isolation, and then began to nod off. Not for long, though. Soon Yumino entered the classroom and greeted the class. In a word, everyday life continued, along with the routine that invariably accompanied these everyday life. In the class, few people grew up besides me. Apparently, my active growth phase began earlier than others. The main thing is that this does not come back to haunt you with a sudden shock of hormones. Okay, I'll somehow survive this in the village, but if I start getting sick during some mission, it could end badly. It is better to let the transitional age be either before graduating from the academy, or after the attack on Konoha by Orochimaru. At a time when the world will be relatively calm. Or let the chakra neutralize this effect altogether. That would be great. Hello, children. Mizuki-sensei greeted us, spreading his arms to the sides. Today we will begin to study a new subject, Bukujutsu, in which you will learn to correctly throw weapons at a target. This is an extremely important skill for a shinobi. With the help of throwing weapons, you can not only effectively inflict damage, but also limit the enemy's movement. The more accurately and better your throw is calculated, the more useful it will be in battle. There are also advanced techniques based on thrown weapons, but they are not studied at the academy. But no one forbade studying them later, right? He looked around us attentively. Then he turned to the previously prepared targets. They were depicted in the form of a classic drawing of a humanoid, on which the chest, stomach, legs, arms, and, of course, the head were marked, respectively. Accurately driving a kunai and then a shuriken into each of the marks, the future trader listened to the delighted sighs of the clanless children, and then nodded to each of the wooden models of kunai so that we could take them one by one. Then the teacher broke us off. It seems that it was not in vain that I thought that they would not teach us how to throw wood. He lined us up in a row and checked, one by one, that we were holding our weapons correctly. Surprisingly, half actually took it incorrectly. Someone grabbed it with an underhand grip, with the blade down. Someone even took it like the shaft of a hoe, grabbed it tightly into a fist with all their fingers, holding the tip vertically upward. I also made a mistake, but fortunately, not in the grip, but in the position of the elbows. So they say, they don't hold the kunai before throwing it. Well, I didn't know that you need to hold it like before throwing. However, the situation there was also different from the one I would have found myself in. Finally, when everyone more or less grabbed the weapon properly, Mitsuki gave us a lecture in which he explained to us the features of throwing kunai. Alas, the lesson was almost entirely theoretical. Practice with metal weapons will begin only after a few lessons. However, even so, I picked up some grains of useful information that will not be superfluous. After all, it's the little things that make all the difference, don't they? And this should also be used. A little faster, a little stronger, a little more deftly, and now you have a serious advantage over your opponent. During the 3 months of vacation, as I already said, I devoted a fairly decent amount of time to meditation. During these sessions, I noticed that my heart gradually began to release a little more energy, and the energy channels, accordingly, began to allow more chakra to pass through. After thinking about it for a while, I realized that this is how the reserve grows. After thinking for some more time, I weighed all the pros and cons and decided to try to speed up the process a little. If this increases the volume of chakra, then this will only be a plus for me. But even while coming up with my plan, I thought about how to do this as safely as possible for myself. And guess what? It turned out that there was no way. In order to increase the production of internal energy, I need to somehow artificially influence the rate of development of the lesion. How to do it? That's right, in any case, using the same chakra. And in order to influence her, I need no matter how much I want to take a risk. But it was not, I decided to try, because before this case, I assessed my risks as best I could and considered them acceptable. Arriving at the clearing once again, I took out the food I had specially taken with me and had a proper snack. Then, having mentally prepared myself and for some reason wishing myself good luck, I sat down in some kind of meditation pose. With my hands folded on my chest, I almost habitually fell into the crystal clear sensations of a pure mind and inexplicable pleasure from the opportunity to truly feel my body. Having achieved a stable position in this rather fragile state, I turned to my chakra system. No, I didn't see it in the usual sense of the word. How can you even see something inside yourself with your eyes? In fact, I felt it with some kind of sixth sense, and so clearly that my eyes began to seem like a very imperfect instrument for understanding the world around me. Then, during my first conscious meditation aimed at finding a hearth, I barely felt something unusual, new in my body, somewhere on the edge of sensations. Then, with great difficulty, I managed to reach out to the necessary sensations, while each subsequent attempt was made easier and easier, until the moment when I learned to feel my chakra system only with the help of one small volitional effort. Having habitually felt my hearth, I turned to it and carefully began to feel it for some mechanism that would allow me to influence it. Not noticing such, I followed the first canon of any magic I wished. I concentrated on my desire, on the result I wanted to achieve. And quite surprisingly, I succeeded. Not immediately, but after several attempts, the feeling of energy coming from my hearth intensified quite a bit. And with great pleasure I felt how the channels through which the chakra passed barely noticeably tensed. Having decided that I had enough of such training for the first day, I returned the energy to normal mode in exactly the same way, and then returned to the real world. I have noticed more than once that during meditation time moves a little differently. If sometimes it took no more than an hour of real time, as now, for example, it was still light outside, while I started meditating almost in the evening, then periodically, during some kind of concentration exercise, time flew by very quickly. If an hour passed relative to me, what is called outside the window, a whole day passed. Fortunately, At the time I noticed this, I was still on vacation, and I wasn't late for anything. Since then, I have tried to be more careful with my meditations, trying not to lose the passage of time during any training. This, by the way, also served as a concentration exercise, albeit not as effective. Generally speaking, I try not to stand still in my development, and apparently, something worked out for me. It's just that I haven't yet been able to understand what exactly, since it was unclear how such unusual training could help me in the future. For now, all I could do was not lose what I had already achieved and comprehend what had not yet been mastered, and also hope that my unconventional activities would not turn out to be harmful, but quite the opposite, would bring me, as a shinobi, some benefit. Chapter 6: Study. Ever since I started to get better at meditation, I began to constantly experience slight discomfort when I slightly stimulated the work of the source. My hearth was far from at its limit. He produced only a couple % more chakra than normal, but my chakra channels still didn't appreciate it. And from that time on, I learned how to keep the source in this state constantly. Even at night I experienced, albeit phantom, very unpleasant sensations throughout my body. I tried to develop all channels at once, because I knew that over time, anyone, even the most subtle and inconspicuous tenketsu *, could come in handy. If the Byakugan, one of the 3 types of dojutsu, which is a feature of members of the Hyuga clan, could see the largest 64 and even 128 dots, then the rest were difficult to see even for me in my own body. Well, how to see it, rather, feel it and feel it. They themselves were practically closed in the body and created such small disturbances in the chakra that they could often be noticed only using the poke method. This method saved quite large amounts of time, which I could spend on scanning my chakra body as a whole, and made it possible to greatly simplify the search, thanks to dividing the search into sections and concentrating all my attention there. Having found the channels, with a slight effort of will I slightly increased the chakra current there. No, rather it redirected one of the streams. I tried to act very carefully, since breaking such thin tubes was easy. But I did not give up on the goal, and at the moment I have already finished working with each channel in my legs. I have not touched and will not touch, perhaps, only one of my brains. The sensations that accompanied the flow of chakra through slightly overloaded channels were not particularly pleasant. It is difficult to find an analogy, but one could imagine that something is crawling over you, quite irritating the skin, but at the same time it is impossible to see or get rid of it. The sensations were so, and even despite the obvious benefits strengthening and training the channels, I often wanted to return everything as it was and wait for the training instructions to fall on my head. Of course, I restrained such impulses with all my might, but such training was terribly annoying. However, trying to concentrate on something became much more difficult. And with such help, in the form of a constant irritant, I made amazing leaps in developing willpower and abstracting myself from unpleasant sensations. Well, relatively speaking, of course, however, time passed, training continued, I grew, but nothing changed. No, of course, some small events were constantly happening, but nothing concrete, fortunately or unfortunately, happened. I gradually saved money, the blacksmith began to give me quite a good salary for an errand boy, and the training went on as usual. I carefully cultivated the ability to meditate constantly in the background. It was, without exaggeration, extremely difficult, but the prospects for future success covered everything. After all, the skill to control one's hearth directly, and not through seals, could come precisely from such a seemingly unsightly skill. But it will still take me a lot of time to achieve such mastery. After all, the ability to be in a weak version of meditation constantly, and also to do something with the chakra system in battle, even to my inexperienced eye, sounds very incredible and fabulous. But I simply wouldn't be me if I could deny myself such an attempt. Even if I don't succeed in anything like this, I can pump up my concentration to such a state that most of the illusions that I someday start working with will turn out much easier and faster. If, of course, I can learn a more difficult skill before learning them. But as I already said, the time spent training, working and studying flew by very quickly. and another year passed very unnoticed. The next vacation began, which also flew by in the blink of an eye. Every day I got up, symbolically waved my arms and legs, checked the integrity of my chakra channels, hastily stopped the impulse to remove the source of irritation, and then put myself in order and moved to the academy. I was usually quite awake there, since being sleepy with such an annoying problem was quite difficult. In the morning, this itching under the skin woke me up so much that the need for coffee disappeared. And in general, I always tried to get a good night's sleep, since I have loved sleeping since childhood. My classmates clearly did not adhere to the regime. Naruto, for example, was the embodiment of impermanence, because sometimes he fell asleep at the entrance to the classroom, and sometimes he flew into the window and loudly drew attention to his person. People then, by the way, winced. Over the course of a year, the Uchiha learned to maintain a real impenetrable don't care face. So it was almost impossible to understand whether he had had enough sleep or not. The real embodiment of stability was Shikamaru. He, as you understand, was always in the most sleepy and dreamy state. This was his credo. Again, so to speak. Iruka was always cheerful by morning, and only sometimes did he show indirect signs of lack of sleep. In particular, something like this could be seen after some test work. Apparently, he had to check everything alone. In terms of learning ability, most of the children maintained average grades. And I remembered I was also pleased with the work evaluation system at the academy. It was also done according to English letters, where F is the actual score, while each subsequent grade was slightly better. Well, that is, like this: F is 2, E is 3-, D is a solid 3, while C is 4-, B is 4, and finally A and S are 5- and 5, respectively. Of course, in practice there are practically no F designations anywhere, but these are trifles, aren't they? Techniques are listed starting only with E rank, while here, for the convenience of the system, a rating of F has been added. So, about grades. The guys mostly stuck to grades, starting with C and ending with S, however, the latter were quite rare. I tried my best to maintain the same assessments, although it didn't always work out well. For example, in history or geography, which turned out to be a piece of cake for me, I received increased marks. For penmanship, I consistently received grades ranging from D+, yes, sometimes there were plus grades, but, as a rule, teachers did without them, and ending with B, no higher. The problem was that I had difficulty understanding the local written language. After all, the local mentality was formed due to historically developed writing. And because of this, I could not normally accept kanji and other alphabets as something that can be used not as a hobby, but as a main language. And in general, it was not easy, but I taught, kicking the occasional laziness with enviable pedantry. So in the class I was, although not the most stable, but quite a diligent student. Meanwhile, in the third year of training, immediately after the end of the summer, another speech was given to us, in which Iruka announced the start of sparring, but not immediately, but only after training, as far as I understood. So that we do not learn incorrectly choreographed movements from a street fight. He also pleased us that we would begin to study chakra more closely. After memorizing the theory and proven ability to use any of the 12 standard seals, we would be taught training to awaken the source, as well as the ability to change the chakra current in our body in accordance with the seal. I was very happy about the first news, because, as you already know, in my short life I have never had time to be in a real fight. A children's academic brawl does not count, and other kindergarten. And despite my ability to use my legs and throws, I could not be considered a fighter because I was afraid to hit. Before that, any fight with my participation ended in failure for me, so from the age of 13 I was always quite peaceful. So as not to accidentally kill anyone, and now it was playing a bad joke on me. I was also pleased with the normal chakra theory. Here, albeit simplified, but at least understandable definitions were given, which made it possible to at least roughly understand the essence of what is happening with the chakra system. If in the first classes we repeated concepts such as chakra, a mixture of spiritual and bodily energy and blah blah blah, then we began to study in more detail the properties of kirakuki, where truly useful information began to be given. For example, it was said in some detail about special tablets for ninjas and the essence of their effect on the hearth. As it turns out, these pills actually use a rather clumsy method. They simply overload it, instantly force it to work for wear and tear, which, as I understand from my own experience, is very, very unhelpful. Especially considering my overload of 2% versus instantaneous several dozen. When I imagine the sensations of ninjas who use them, I immediately feel very, very bad. Pills are evil. I always knew it. Also, during the following lessons, a lot of useful things were said about the simplest seal of concentration. By the beginning of the year, it was given simply to memorize the execution of the fig, and then it was on it, as Irika told me, that the first attempts would be made to change the chakra flows, which, due to this seal, would be brought into relative balance, which is quite strong, facilitates the impact on energy in the future. Well, this seal is also relatively safe in relation to others. After all, no teacher will be happy if a student, through his indirect fault, receives a kirakue injury. Chapter 7, Sparring. The first sparring was announced to us a week before this significant event. Still, for me and for many other students, this event was significant, since the first fight for any shinobi was very important. Firstly, he greatly influenced the position in the class. After all, there was a concept of strength here. The better you demonstrate it in battle, the more reverence they will treat you with. Secondly, many of the children here understood that their lives would soon become one big battle, which was divided into many smaller ones. And the first sparring, in a sense, was the first battle, and this also added its own flavor. No, if you look at your whole life as a whole, then this is very insignificant, but taking into account only the next month, it was quite difficult to find a more significant event. I was jittery even before this event. I even recalled blows from earthly sports clubs a couple of times. The problem I had was that although my moves had very serious damage potential, they required serious overclocking to cause it. It was both dangerous and spectacular, but alas, very slow. If my prospective opponent strikes me with several very noticeable blows, then I will already lose the advantage, and my blow may not reach the target at all due to the fact that the target and force of the blow are immediately visible. Accordingly, no one will accept him on the block. And the length of the legs was still very, very small. It simply would not be enough to generate sufficient inertia for an impact. But nevertheless, I repeated all this carefully. Suddenly something will work out. As it turned out, I was able to do this easily. It would be nice if it was the stretching that was to blame, but no, I could perform strikes without it. Some of my techniques were performed while jumping, and that was the most interesting part. I could jump high. Very. Regarding my world, I would have already become the very, very best world champion, since jumping 3 meters in height is not the most common event for me. And it was scary. The first time I made such a move, I landed in pure surprise. And what is most interesting, it is absolutely painless. I was then extremely surprised and rejoiced at future prospects, like a child, because if before I simply loved acrobatics and suffered because of my too tall height, now, no matter what size I am, I can perform any, even the most complex techniques without risking a broken neck. After all, local energy helped here too. Yeah, the chakra is the head of everything. Also during this week we practiced various combat movements as a group. Mitsuki-sensei carefully monitored the students to ensure that no one injured their limbs by striking the wooden mannequins. And why did he become a traitor? After all, he likes to teach, and he's not much of a fighter and a hidden killer, to be honest. However, this was not my most important discovery. As it turns out, chakra can help here too. Those children who had awakened their source, or were close to it, had greater overall physical strength, meaning many were able to hit wooden targets with their feet and hands without experiencing much discomfort. No, it wasn't even the strengthening of muscles with chakra, but simply the advantage of the very presence of an awakened hearth. I was immensely surprised when I tried it myself. Even with all my desire, I could only damage my skin by abrasing it with a glancing blow, and even then, it was much stronger than I was used to. This was very, very unusual, and at first I unconsciously weakened the blows, until my subconscious finally got used to the fact that nothing would happen to me anyway. And it seems that I have found another reason for the particular severity of the training that is practiced here. And it consisted in the fact that even with a full blow, it is not so easy to injure a shinobi. And the locals, from their very training as shinobi, did not spare their partner, knowing that they would not harm him at all. And then came a significant day for sparring. This time, all students without exception came to the academy. Although sometimes some of those children who came from clans or young families of hereditary ninjas did not come to regular lessons. Apparently, part of their training took place in the clan. Now everyone has gathered: Hyuga, Inuzuka, Aburame, Akimichi, Nara, Yamanaka, and even Uchiha deigned to come in for a sneak peek. However, this was not surprising. For whom, if not for him, is the first sparring most important? After all, this is one of the first steps towards the revenge he so anticipates. True, Hyuga will not fight here. She came just to look. I learned about this from Irika, who himself clarified this point with her. However, it is clear why. Her style without the use of chakra is absolutely useless, while with its use it can cause very serious injuries to her opponent. Clanless and hereditary ninja carefully hid behind each other, trying not to stand out in any way, so that, kami forbid, none of them would be pitted against children from clans. There were, of course, exceptions. Where would we be without them? I kept to myself, talking in a low voice with Choji, who was eating before they were called to fight. Do you think you will win your fight? I asked him, carefully examining my future possible sparring partners. I don't know. Brumhum. It all depends on who my opponent will be. For example, with Ino, Choji said, looking around. I think I can handle it. But Sasuke will not be easy to defeat. He's pretty strong. Yes, I think it will be a difficult opponent. What do you think about Shikamaru? Do you think he would have won if he hadn't been lazy? Oh, Shikamaru is smart. Akimichi agreed with me with his head, taking out a new package of something edible. Sometimes it seems to me that if he could have wanted to, he would have defeated any of us. It's a shame he doesn't want to do this. Meanwhile, Irika, who was the judge, approached us. Mitsuki was also present, but rather as someone who would watch the students master the material. Hello, children. After listening to an inconsistent greeting from our side, Yumino continued. Today, as you already know, the first lesson dedicated to sparring will be held. Remember, knowing how to fight in taijutsu is a very important skill for any ninja, and they should not be neglected. But don't forget that this is a training match, and only pure taijutsu is allowed here. Don't be offended by the winners, this is just an indicator that you have something to work on. Don't despise losers, they themselves know that they have something to strive for. Let's start the first battle. Shino Aburame vs. Ino Yamanaka. Come out here. Out of the orderly formation of clan children came the already well-known fair-haired girl and a guy tightly wrapped in clothes with a strange manner of speech. Standing opposite each other as per Irika's instructions, they stood in the standard leaf-style stance taught at the academy. However, I didn't expect anything special. Aburama requires little to no taijutsu, and Yamanaka is closer to interrogation rooms than to the battlefield. True, everyone should know the basics, as both opponents are now demonstrating. Let's start. Yumino initiated the fight. Aburame did not go on the attack, but stood in a standard defensive stance, preparing to repel blows, while Ino, slowly rearranging her legs, moved towards her opponent. Overall, the fight was pretty boring. Both children were from clans, but at the same time, their physical training and coordination of movements left much to be desired as unnecessary, so they fought without any fire, exchanging blows somehow lazily, or something. The style was purely academic. There was no speed or improvisation in it. In a word, it was boring. The winner has not been announced. After a certain period of time, they were simply stopped and the next participants were called. Next, a couple of clanless disciples were summoned. One guy's name, I think, was Kiyoshi, and I don't even remember the second one. Their fight was, although somewhat more lively, because they fought from the heart. But the pace of the fight suffered greatly due to the ineffectiveness of the techniques. Both boys often used long swings pushed in a rustic way, and acted with extremely low efficiency. In general, they didn't last long. The fuse disappeared, and they, seeing how people were looking at them, quietly slipped into the crowd of people like them. After such a spectacle, where we were shown a hot fight without technology, as opposed to technique without a spark, they simply had to give us something else. And exactly. Uzumaki Naruto versus Uchiha Sasuke. Apparently, the sensei understood how the previous battles would end, and showed the students the difference between types of opponents. Now there was a particularly striking example when technology and the desire to fight will defeat someone who has only one criterion: the desire to win. As you might guess, the first is an Uchiha, who partially knows his clan style, and the second is an Uzumaki, whom no one has ever taught. Standing opposite each other in the most pathetic poses, they waited for the signal to start the battle. "Let's start," Irika shouted. However, none of them went on the attack right away, because they first had to say something pathetic. "Maybe I should sign up to become a seer? Or at least a psychologist? I can easily defeat you, team!" Uzumaki jumped up. "Pfft. You can't beat me, loser." After such a peculiar ritual was observed, Naruto with a clear conscience rushed into a frontal attack. Alas, the Uchiha had probably already awakened his hearth, and his body was much faster, and his reaction speed was higher, not to mention Sasuke's style and already established training system, which is not yet outdated for his age. And in general, the Uchiha acted very rationally and came up with something in battle. Naruto, as it was clear to me, was also no stranger to improvisation, but without at least a little base there was no point in it as such. Any of his tricks was immediately visible behind the general clumsiness of his movements. After a couple of exactly the same awkward punches from Naruto, Uchiha deftly caught Uzumaki and immediately after his retreat kicked him in the stomach, causing him to lose his footing and plop down on the ground. However, it was more offensive than painful. Being very short has its advantages. "Pfft, I told you so." Sasuke stopped, watching the blushing Uzumaki, who had already jumped to his feet. "Oh you! I'll show you now!" As a result of such a tragicomedy, Uzumaki fell and got up 2 more times, until Irika got tired of it and stopped the fight. After telling both of them what he thought about their technique, the teacher called the next pair. Next fight, Shikamaru Nara vs. Kaoin Shinichi. Very, very unexpected. "Oh," the main lazy person of the group said, throwing his hands behind his head. "This is so stressful, just don't give up, okay?" I asked him immediately, knowing his love for quick defeats. "How did you even guess?" Shikamaru stood in an academic stance. "Okay, you'll have a fight." We stood opposite each other, waiting for the signal, which did not take long to arrive. "Let's start." I immediately rushed into battle, without creating pathos and other unnecessary things. Well, this would be necessary when using chakra. Prepare your Kirakuki. Warm up the channels with a slight acceleration. But why here? Once again I was surprised at my speed. I accelerated much faster than I was used to, and there wasn't much air resistance. I jumped up to Nara, and while he instinctively blocked the blow from above, I stopped in front of him and carried out the widest possible circular sweep. It was necessary to give Shikamaru his due. Already at his age, he instantly calculated the situation, noting that nothing flew into his block. My opponent immediately broke the distance. But even despite this, I managed to knock out one leg that was no longer supporting. By inertia, Nara turned a little to the side, which I took advantage of. Until he regained his balance, I instantly twisted my leg, slightly pushing the enemy's hooked limb behind me, and then threw my body forward along with my left hand, which slammed into Shikamaru's eyebrow. Due to the high force of the blow, the heir of the clan could not maintain his already damaged sense of balance and fell on the grass, albeit with maximum comfort. Quickly getting his bearings, Nara instantly took the chance to lie down for at least a minute, and even managed to put his hands behind his head, staring dreamily at the almost cloudless sky. For those around him, the battle passed very quickly. After our very brief conversation, I simply jumped on Shikamaru and, not reaching him about half a meter, sharply crouched down with a circular sweep, and then, barely hitting the quickly reacting Nara, I rose sharply with a punch. Hee hee. Shika, who was lying on the grass, laughed quietly. It seems that you defeated me. But it was still stressful, you know. Coming out of his stupor, Iruka-sensei declared my victory, while I helped Shika up, and then took him to his friends. This was beautiful. Chuji greeted me, intercepting Nara from my hands. I have never seen such a technique before. I just nodded gratefully, settling down next to the guys from the future Inoshikacho team. How are you? I turned to Shika. Didn't I beat you back? Will there be a bruise? Don't worry, Nara said, frivolously imitating a movement somewhat reminiscent of a wave of the hand. I've had more pain, especially when my mother was angry with me because of some misdeed. Shikamaru, rubbing the back of his head, winced at some memory. By the way, you really did a great job. Did someone teach you? No, what are you saying? What kind of teachers are I? I was surprised. Complete improvisation. And this happens? Shika nodded his head understandably, rummaging through the package of chips from the dissatisfied Chuji. However, Nara stubbornly pretended that he did not notice the expression on his friend's face. After the one-on-one battles were over, Mitsuki analyzed the mistakes of each of us who had been in the training match. If Ino and Shino were criticized for their lack of initiative in battle, then the clanless, on the contrary, were convicted of a complete lack of technology and low reaction speed. Nara, on the contrary, was praised for it. Well, yes, he very bravely tried to dodge the hook, while I had the honor of being praised for successful improvisation and speed. Life was getting better. Looks like I'm not as useless in battle as I thought. The main thing is not to become arrogant yourself and not to stand out too much from the general mass of students.